Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishna Shabbos, and we are starting Parak Ches, chapter 18, Mishna Aleph, Mishnah 1. That dedicate this morning's learning memory of my mother, Ms. Shalom, Ms. Rabinowitz. Our learning should be a schus for her neshama.
Amen.
All right. Our Mishnahs we're discussing are actually the introduction to the Mishnah is the fact that the Chachamim, the sages, forbade doing too much work on Shabbos. Now, even if something can be permissible, but if it involves a lot of work, a lot of exertion, the Chachamim said you can't do it. It's not in the spirit of Shabbos. These kinds of exerting yourself too much, the Chachamim forbade. So the Mishnah says like this, based on that. Mefanin afilu arba v'chamesh kupos shel teben v'shel tevua. One can clear away even 4 or 5 boxes of grain, or of straw or of grain, because a guest, or so as not to prevent the students from being absent from studying Torah. So basically, you have a room in your house full of boxes of grain, of food. You need to clear them out so you can have room for your guests. Or if you are a teacher and your students want to come study Torah, if you're not going to clear out the boxes and make room for them, they won't come to study Torah. So in these situations, and it says you can even take out 4 or 5 boxes. The truth is 4 or 5 is the way the Mishnah says as much as you want. Whatever amount of boxes you want to take out, you can. There's the work involved, this schlepping the boxes out. So even though there is a lot of exertion involved in doing that, but since for the purpose of a mitzvah, having guests is a mitzvah, teaching Torah is a mitzvah. Being that it's for the purpose of a mitzvah, the Chachamim said that you can take out as many as you want. But you cannot make the storehouse empty. That means like this, to actually clear away things. Now, this is the way they explain it. The way they explain it is that one may not empty the storehouse, thereby exposing the earthen floor, because one might smooth out bumps and holes in the ground, which is a form of malacha building. In a situation of a dirt floor, there are times where the Chachamim are concerned that you may want to smooth it out. Nowadays we have wooden floors, we have whatever, right? Everything's smooth. And if you have an earthen floor, a dirt floor, it has, it can sometimes get uneven. And a person's going to want to even it out, either by pushing dirt, pushing out dirt, pushing in dirt. And if you do that on Shabbos, that constitutes building. That's like building on Shabbos. It's considered building. And therefore, we don't want you to do that. So therefore, in this case, the Chachamim are saying you cannot expose the floor because that's exposing the dirt floor, and we're afraid you're going to smooth it out. So that sounds like I can move as many boxes as I want away, but I can't move boxes in a way that now I expose the floor. Sounds to me like, right, that everybody's going to be on top of the boxes. There's going to be something, meaning something's still going to be on the bottom there, right? There's going to be some boxes, and it could be these boxes were big crates, so people could sit on them. People could do what you want to do on them. So even though you'd want to, maybe initially try to take them all away, but and clearly you need to move maybe even a lot of them away to have room for the guests at all. But nonetheless, whatever you're moving away cannot be to the point that you are exposing the dirt floor. Okay, now, so the first part of the Mishnah teaches us that even though there's exertion involved, you can still move away as many boxes as you want in order to do a mitzvah. So that is, we allow you to do a mitzvah even though there's a lot of work involved, a lot of exertion involved. But if, let's say, you want to clear out something that's muktzah, even though you want the area for a mitzvah, that you can't do. Now, again, we did learn that if something is a kli shemalachta le'iser, if the reason it's muktzah is because its primary function is something you can do on Shabbos, then you could move it if you need the area that it's on. But that's not what we're going to talk about. We're talking about things that have become muktzah because they have no usage. They're not food. They're not an edible food. They're not a utensil. That's a stronger form of muktzah that you just can't move. So even though we allow you to exert yourself to do a mitzvah, but to move muktzah, we're not going to allow you. So now the Mishnah is going to go through examples of things that are not muktzah and that are muktzah. So the Mishnah continues. Mefanin truma tahira. One can move away truma, that's tar. Truma is what we separate from our grain and give to a kohen. Now, can you eat truma? No. So maybe for you it should be muktzah because you have no use for it. The answer is no. Being that this is food for a kohen, it's not muktzah and you can move it. And that's if it's tahir, if it's pure. Pure truma, he can use. Anybody the kohen can use. If it's impure truma, they can only use it to burn it as a fuel. And on Shabbos, he can't do that. So for everybody, so then it would be muktzah. But we're talking about truma tahira, it's pure, it's edible to the kohen, and therefore it's food. Udamai, you can move demai. Demai, if you recall, is grain that was bought from a amaretz, from a person who's ignorant. That ignorant person, we are concerned that although he may have separated trumas, what it goes to the kohen might have done, what goes to the maestros, the tithings that have to be done, they weren't careful about. And if you do not separate the tithings from your pile of grain, your pile of grain is going to be forbidden to eat from. Now, most Ameyaretz, most ignorant people did it, but there was enough that the Chachamim were concerned that if you buy grain from an Ameyaretz, from an ignorant person, you have to separate maestros from it. And until then, you can't eat it. So now, let's say you've got this box of demai. You can't eat it. Right? It should be muktzah. But the answer is that being that demai is a rabbinic prohibition, they said that poor people can eat it. They did not put on the poor the obligation to separate demai. Since the majority of ignorant people do separate maestros, when the Chachamim instituted to be strict and to say that if you buy from them, you can't eat until you separate, that did not apply to poor people. Since poor people can eat it, it's considered food. Next. After we separate truma for the kohen, the next thing we separate from the rest of the pile, let's say for the kohen we give 1/50th. After that, from what's left, you take off 1/10 and you give it to the Levi. Now, the Levi has to separate 1/10 of his 10th and give it to the kohen. If he doesn't do so, it's forbidden to eat. So therefore, the Mishnah says, Ma'aser Rishon, that truma, meaning the 10th of a 10th that's supposed to go to the kohen was given, is now it's not muktzah anymore. Why? Because anybody can eat it. It belongs to the Levi, but the Levi can feed it to Yisrael. A kohen cannot feed truma to a Yisrael or to a Levi, but a Levi can feed his ma'aser to anybody he wants. So once the truma is taken off, it's edible to everybody, it's good to go. Next, u'ma'aser sheni v'hektish sheniftu. Ma'aser sheni means that if I have to get a pile of grain, after I take off truma for the kohen, and then after that, 1/10 to the Levi, I take off another 10th from what's left over. And that's called Ma'aser Sheni, the second Ma'aser. The second Ma'aser is sanctified. You can only eat it in Yerushalayim. Or you redeem it onto money, and the money has to be taken to Yerushalayim and spent on food there. So if you have Ma'aser Sheni, okay, if you didn't redeem it, no one's allowed to eat it. But if you did redeem it, then it's edible. The same thing if it's hektish. You sanctify. You took grain and you sanctified it. You consecrated. You say it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, belongs to the temple. You can't eat it unless you redeem it. But once you redeem it, it's good to go. Anybody can eat it. So therefore, if you have Ma'aser Sheni and Hektish that were redeemed, they're not muktzah. You can move that away. Now, Tormes Hayavesh. Tormes is as translated as lupine.
That's a tree.
Well, apparently it had nuts or something to it. It had some kind of bean or something from it. Called it lupines. So dry lupines, okay, are very bitter. Most people don't eat them, but the people who do eat them, says the Mishnah, poor people eat it. So since poor people eat it, it's considered a food. Even though most people may not eat it, but the poor do, therefore it's considered a food. It's not muktzah. The Mishnah says only the dry lupines, the moist ones, the fresh ones, no one can eat. Not edible at all. Okay, now, so those are the examples of things that are not muktzah, and you can move them. Now, you may be thinking like, why would I think not that way? If everything was fixed and everything's edible, okay, so the ones that maybe only are edible for certain people, the Mishnah tell you that's enough. But the other ones that are edible for everyone, like why would you think otherwise? So the Bartanura goes through how each one has its novel law that's being taught by mentioning it, and we're not going to go into right now. Now, avaloyas tevel. But if you have grain that's tevel means that that it was not that what has to be separated from it hasn't been separated, and it's forbidden for everyone to eat. Nor can you move the ma'aser rishon, that which was separated for the Levi, that the truma, meaning what goes to the Kohen from the Levi, wasn't separated. The ma'aser rishon that belongs to the Levi, the first ma'aser belongs to the Levi, that is truma wasn't taken. That's tevel. No one can eat it. Let's say you have ma'aser sheni or consecrated grain that was never redeemed. No one's allowed to eat it. So all those things you can't move because they are muktzah. Now, v'loyas haluf v'loy hachardal. Nor can you move boxes of luf. Luf, they do not translate what it is exactly, but they call it a legume. It is not edible. And the point is that, number one, it's not even edible for animals. It's not an animal food. You wouldn't even feed it to your animals. And if you want to make it edible, you know what you got to do? You got to cook it. And on Shabbos, you can't do that. So therefore, the luf is muktzah. Now, also, chardal. You know what chardal is? Mustard seeds. Now, mustard seeds also are not edible. You're not going to feed it to your animals either. Mustard seeds cannot be eaten until they are ground, and grinding is forbidden on Shabbos. So these two things have ways of making them edible, and if you made them edible, they wouldn't be muktzah. We're talking about before that, so they're muktzah, so boxes of them you cannot move. Excuse me. Shimon Gamliel permitted to move luf. Why? Arvin. It's fed to ravens. It's raven food. Now, the way to understand Shimon Gamliel is the following. Shimon Gamliel understands that this luf is not your typical animal food. Most animals don't eat it.
What is it?
It doesn't say what it is. It doesn't say. They don't say what it is exactly. Call it luf. It is not, most animals do not eat luf. Rav Shimon Gamliel said, but being that that luf is fed to ravens, and noblemen used to raise ravens, it was a sign of prestige in those days. Shimon Gamliel said, all right, that's enough. That's enough for it to be considered a food, or an animal food, and it's not muktzah. Tanna Kama says that basically, most animals didn't eat it. And the fact that, ravens eat it when they're being raised by rich people, because they for some reason, it's a sign of prestige, that's not enough to say that's considered an animal food and not be muktzah. And the halach is not like Rav Shimon Gamliel. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.